Hi, I'm Amy, and welcome to the Macaron Academy, where we turn home bakers into master macaron makers. In today's video, we're going to talk about the essential macaron ingredients that are the basis of just about every recipe out there. And we'll also talk about the equipment needed that will help you in being successful in making macarons. So first, let's talk about the ingredients. Ingredients are broken up into two main groups. You have dry ingredients and you have what are called wet ingredients. So let's talk about the dry ingredients first. Your dry ingredients are going to be your almond flour, and depending on the recipe, you'll weigh out a certain amount of almond flour. And then you will combine that almond flour with your other dry ingredient, which is powdered sugar. The two together form the basis of your dry ingredients, and those will be mixed with your wet ingredients, which the wet ingredients end up being your meringue. So let's switch over to that. And the first ingredient for your wet is room temperature egg whites. Now, there's a big debate. Do these have to be aged for 24 hours, which means like you broke apart the egg and let it sit overnight? Can you use them the same day? I've experimented with this, and honestly, I haven't found a big difference. I typically will take out my eggs the day of, and sometimes even 30 minutes before. I use them in a recipe and just let them sit out and come to room temperature. There's a saying that, they need to be aged to dehydrate. That might be true in a humid environment. I used to live in a humid environment, and even then, I really didn't have an issue whether I aged my egg whites or not. So I just want to put that out there because I know that is a big question. Now, to go with the egg whites, you need granular sugar. So I know this technically is not a wet ingredient, but it is combined with your egg whites in a mixer to form your meringue. So this is an essential ingredient as well. We have granulated sugar here in the US. I believe there's also castor sugar, which is even more fine, which also works as well. You're going to need granular or castor sugar with your egg whites. Now, the next ingredient that I want to share is optional. I use it because I found that it stabilizes my meringue, makes it a little more forgiving. I use dried egg whites. It's egg white powder. I just mix it in with my granulated sugar before I mix that in with the egg whites that have been beat. Some people will also use cream of tartar. That also is optional, and it basically does the same thing. Powdered egg whites, it just makes your meringue more stable, strengthens the protein in the meringue. Again, it just makes your meringue more forgiving. So your 4 essential ingredients are your almond flour, your powdered sugar, your granulated sugar, and your egg whites. Now that we've talked about the essential ingredients for macarons, let's talk about equipment. Now, I have a list of what I call must-have equipment and nice-to-have equipment. Number 1, must-have. Absolutely, you've got to have this. Kitchen scale. Macarons are almost like an exact science. If you try to just do your ingredients by volume, like using a cup or whatever, you're asking for trouble. You're not going to get consistency, and you get air and things inside your measuring cup that you can't even see. So you're not always using like the same ratios when you use volume, but if you use weight, you are using like exact ratios. So it gives you a much, much better chance of your macarons turning out. So kitchen scale, absolute must. Number 2 on the list is a mixer. Now, you don't have to have the big stand mixer, which I have here. That's actually what I would put on the nice to have, but you do need a mixer of some kind. So if you have a hand mixer, that will work, okay? If you're just starting out and you don't know if you're gonna like making macarons and you don't have a stand mixer, use a hand mixer. Yes, absolutely you can use your hands, but I will promise you, your arm will fall off before you finish making your macarons. The next item that is an absolute must are your mixing bowls. I use two different bowls. One, this actually is used, my smaller bowl is used for measuring out my granulated sugar. And then I have my bigger mixing bowl where after my almond flour and powdered sugar are combined, they go in here along with the meringue, and that ends up making your macaron batter. So mixing bowls are definitely a must as well. Going along with the bowls, you need a sieve or a strainer, because when you combine your almond flour and your powdered sugar, you need to run it through a sifter of some kind. That's going to take out the larger chunks. Most almond flour will have some small little chunks left over after it goes through your sifter. You don't want those in your batter because it's going to make your macarons really lumpy and bumpy. It will just help you get that smooth top. So this is also, I would put on the must list. Another thing that is essential is a whisk. I use the whisk in helping incorporate my almond flour and my powdered sugar together. Essentially what that's going to do is make your shell smoother. So you want to make sure your dry ingredients are well incorporated, and the whisk will help you. Some people use a food processor, but I found the whisk actually works just fine. Next on the list are spatulas. You are definitely going to need at least one spatula. That's going to come in the macaronage stage. Once we get our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients combined, we have to use a spatula to incorporate all of that together, and that is called macaronage. That's a whole nother video just on that technique. Spatula is definitely a must. Now that we have all of our ingredients combined into a batter, the next thing you're going to need is a bag to pipe out your batter. If you're not going to invest a lot of time or money into making macarons, you can use a Ziploc bag, but you're not going to get the nice, perfectly round shells if you use a Ziploc bag. I recommend using a piping bag. This here is a Wilton. I just bought a pack, and these are 12-inch bags, but I'll be honest with you, I would probably buy the next size up. I find that these fill up way too quickly with the recipe that I use. If I could have maybe a 16 or a 20, it would be even better. But this is just what I had at the moment. This works just fine. Now, I use a piping tip. This is the Wilton 12 tip. It's round, as you can see. You'll see other people using a larger round tip. I just kind of bought these on the whim. We just moved to Colorado from the East Coast. All my baking equipment I ended up selling before we moved out here. So I'm having to start all over. This was something I could grab on the fly, but it works just fine. So you could put your tip in the bag. Tip is optional, but highly recommended. Now that we have our batter in the piping bag ready to go, we need a baking tray to pipe onto and to bake in the oven. I would not bake directly on the baking tray. I would either use parchment paper, or in my nice to have list is a silicone mat. I personally, a silicone mat. I find that my shells keep their shape better. I get consistent heating. I just like the look and how my shells cook better on a silicone mat. I have used parchment paper. One of the probably biggest drawbacks of parchment paper is, especially if you have a convection oven where you have the fan running inside, parchment paper, it moves with the flow of air in the oven. And I found that almost every time I use parchment paper, my shells came out more oval than circular, that perfect circle. Your batter just doesn't hold its shape as well as it does on a silicone mat. But absolutely, you can use parchment paper, especially if it's your first time making macarons. Try it first, just, to get a feel of the technique and all that good stuff. And then if you see that you like it, invest in a silicone mat. Our must-haves are the scale, a mixer of some kind, mixing bowls, spatula, a sifter, sieve, or strainer, your baking tray, a bag to pipe your batter, a whisk, and then your nice-to-have equipment is the silicone mat, is the true piping bag, is the tip. Oh, and one other thing while we're talking about piping, it's also good to have a large cup, because when you use a piping bag, A really easy trick is to just pretend we have the tip in there, is to take your cup and your piping bag and just put it right into the cup, and then you fold over the ends of your piping bag. Fold over the ends of your piping bag like that. And then you can take your spatula and just put your batter right in there, and it basically is another hand for you, especially when you're baking by yourself. So not essential, but very, very nice to have. And one other thing that I would say is nice to have is a oven thermometer. If it's your first time making macarons, these are only like $5. They're gonna help you be more successful because every oven is different. I can set the time or the temperature on my oven to say 300, but is my oven really 300 degrees? I don't know. The only way to know is to have an oven thermometer. So if you can get a feel for what your oven is doing, is it true to temperature or does it run 10, 15 degrees hotter or cooler? Then you know how to make adjustments once you see how your first batch of shells come out. Because your oven can make or break your shells, literally. What I have found to be like the successful components in being a master macaron maker is, yes, recipe is important, but I think even more important is your technique and your oven can truly be the determination between success or failure. And we need to take into account all of those things if you want to be successful. But with the right equipment and just knowing your environment, and the oven thermometer will certainly help. You can make tweaks and adjustments and figure out what you need to do for your kitchen.
This is exactly why I created the Macaron Success Journal. It includes a section to keep track of your environment, your oven, and other things that are crucial to the success of your macarons. It also includes a troubleshooting and resource guide. Check the link in the description below to learn more.
And that's why we're here. We're the Macaron Academy, and we are here to make home bakers master macaron makers. Make sure to watch the next video because we are going to be making red velvet macarons with cream cheese filling. And you can see in that video how we take these dry ingredients, the wet ingredients, put them all together to make a beautiful macaron cookie. Have a wonderful day.